You know what? There are so many reasons to be excited and optimistic about our future. So many cracks of light in our world right now. People who are out there courageously blazing new trails and leading the way towards a world where people, planet, and profit collectively thrive. I want you to hear their ideas and let them inspire you to see this time we're in as a fascinating time of transformation. Welcome to the Cracks of Light podcast. I am your host, Laura Storm. Throughout this podcast series, we will co-create a leadership manifesto for a thriving world. Please feel free to join us by going to my website, www.laura-storm.com. And now to the first episode of the Cracks of Light podcast. And this episode will be with me. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you why I've created the Cracks of Light podcast and what kind of adventure we're about to embark on, the kind of people that you're going to meet, and the whole purpose of this. And before I deep dive into that, just a few bits and pieces about me. I am a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a sustainability expert, and have been working within the field of sustainability my entire career. And that was really a passion that were seeded in me from quite a young age. When I, at the age of 9, saw a documentary about how men and machines were destroying our rainforest, and that really woke up this inner warrior that I had to do something to stop this. So, long story short, when I was a kid, I raised money to buy a piece of the rainforest and promised that I would go there to visit as soon as I was old enough, which I did. And when I was there working as a volunteer in the Ecuadorian part of the Amazon, I felt the need to understand the business side of things. So I went to business school, partly in Copenhagen, where I'm from, and in London, where I studied for a year. And then I started to work in the field of climate change policy, sustainability, working to get solutions to work on the ground. I won't go into too many details about my professional background, but you are all welcome to explore more on my website. But basically, this past 10 years, I have started projects and organizations that address this, that address how can we transform our societies to sustainability. How can we make this attractive from a business point of view? And what are the sustainable business models that corporations and organizations need to adopt? So I've been around both addressing this from a climate policy point of view, from innovations, from communication. And the last organization I started was Sustainia, an organization that I started back in 2011. And it was an organization that I started because I was very frustrated after a meltdown of international political negotiations in Copenhagen back in December 2009 during the COP15. And after that, I felt a strong need to start an organization that did not focus on the doom and gloom state scenarios, but instead provided people with an exciting, inspiring, positive vision of how our societies could be like to live in if we implemented the solutions and technologies that we already have available today. So I wrote the guide to Sustainia, and that really kickstarted the development of this international organization. So Sustainia has done a lot of visions and scenario reports, and each year have launched the Sustainia 100, which is an overview of 100 fascinating innovations, technologies, community projects that from 10 different sectors address what can actually be done already and what is happening already in the market. So that's very much how I am as a person as well. I like to focus on the positive, the optimistic side of things, because that's where we can tap into a creativity and an excitement that is needed really to take us in a more sustainable direction. 2 years ago, something happened that was quite a transformative process for me, and that has also shaped what I think is is wrong with the world right now, and where we really need to focus our energy. And I'll come back to that because that's very much why I started the Cracks of Light podcast. But what happened was that I sustained a very severe concussion, a minor traumatic brain injury, which made me completely unable to do anything. All I could cope with was lying in a dark room for months on end. And really it took me about 1.5 years to recover well enough where I was at the stage where I could read and write and function in the world again. So it was quite a long period where I was forced to be with myself in silence. And for a person that is very much the kind of active, go create things person that I am, that was a huge challenge. How do you actually slow down, and how do you actually accept that there's nothing that can be done about this? I have always been used to kind of making a project plan and addressing a problem head on and finding a solution. And that's also what I tried to do with my brain injury, which was really not a good idea and not possible at all. So it forced me to dive deep, and it forced me to, in a way, reconnect with resources inside of me that I had never touched base with before, or at least I had forgotten how to. And it opened up a wealth of new perspectives, ideas, and insights that I'm excited to start share with the world again. I've started to do that for the past half year now. That has shaped a lot of my thinking in terms of what the sustainability movement really needs. Because as a movement and as a field, we have been way too focused on the technologies, the solutions, the political agreements, the financial schemes, etc. And although they are incredibly important, we have forgotten that this is really also an emotional issue. It's about how we actually feel and how we are on this planet. And right now, what I believe we see are broken systems and structures that are creating a hazard on our ecosystems. And it's really, really not sustainable in any sense of the word. And I mean, when you go through the science of the current situation and what we're actually facing, it's quite depressing. Scientists are even talking about this new syndrome of pre-traumatic stress that are taking place among scientists that are addressing biodiversity, climate change, etc., because they know what is really going on and what is about to happen if we do not radically change our behavior on this planet. Just to mention a few details, we are losing 200 species a day because the ecosystems are in such a poor state. They are really, really not thriving because of the way that we have treated our soil, our rivers, oceans, water, air. The food we eat and the water that we drink is contaminated with chemicals and microplastic. And the air we breathe is really not healthy. We have oceans that are filled with plastic and are suffering marine life. And when you look into the details of this, it's overwhelming and not possible for any human to really take on. So what we need is to kind of break down the problem and address this in a more holistic manner so that people actually understand what is really at stake here. But my point is that right now, the stress levels among executives and people in general are increasing yearly. A recent study from HBR said that among executives, 98% feels stressed and burned out on a regular level. And I mean, people that are in that state and in that mindset, when people are stressed, they get tunnel vision. They can only focus on what is immediately ahead of them. They become angry and frustrated a lot more easily, and they lose their ability to be compassionate towards their employees and the people that surround them. And people that are in that state of mind are not able to address the enormity of the problem that we are facing. So my point is that we need to address this at multiple levels, and we need to understand that we have to start a discussion where we allow to talk about how we feel, and where we realize that we can never succeed building more sustainable societies or business models if the people who are leading the effort are in a poor state of mind. And I recently gave a TEDx talk about exactly that, about our need to slow down, and how we will never reach a more sustainable, regenerative society unless we learn how to slow down and embrace silence and tap into a greater and magnificent potential that we all have inside of us, if we actually dare to listen, and if we actually dare to slow down instead of running around living these hectic lives that many of us are doing at the moment. And the TEDx talk was it's very much about my personal journey of recovering from a minor traumatic brain injury. And a couple of months in, I realized that not only did I need help from doctors that could help me with physical retraining of eyesight, and I had both a whiplash and sprained my neck, so I had to do a lot of physical therapy, but that I also needed to see a psychologist to help me deal with the mental challenges of coping with going through such a trauma. And the first time I met her, she said, well, Laura, I know that you care deeply about sustainability and that you're eager to get back out into the field and make a difference. But I just have to ask you whether you think you've lived your life sustainably. As I say in my TEDx talk, I start defending myself and explaining the many ways in which I live very sustainably. But really, I knew what she meant. And I knew that that had not been the case, that I had been terrible at slowing down and creating space for myself. I really firmly believe that if we are to create a regenerative world, we need to create a regenerative lifestyle as well, and that we need to accept that we are thankfully not robots. And if we are to tap into our big potential, our intelligent forces and creative life forces that lies within us, we need to offer our brains and our bodies the space and the environment to do that. So things are interconnected and things go hand in hand, and we cannot continue the discussions where we only talk about solutions, technologies, and policies. We need to talk about mental health and well-being, and I want to help facilitate a dialogue where we dare to stand in our own truth, and where we dare speak from our heart, because we are all human beings and we all have experienced a different life crisis, minor or bigger, and we all have a desire to live an exciting life. But we are so scared of talking about how we really feel, and we are so eager to fit in and not stand out too much. And if we are to truly radically change the current systems and structures, we need to dare listen to what's really inside of us and speak our own truth, because we cannot change the current paradigm with thoughts that are trying to fit into the current paradigm, very much as Einstein once said, we can't fix the current state of the world with the kind of thinking that created the problems in the first place. Now I'm just kind of translating his quote into my words, but I firmly believe that that is true, that we need to create a new narrative where it's okay to talk as a human being that has emotions and needs and desires, and first and foremost, the need to also to slow down and to reconnect with nature as well. That's also one of the things that benefited me immensely in my recovery process, to reconnect with my passion and love for nature, and how I felt like tapping into a big regenerator when I went out in nature. And this experience of sensing the kind of healing capabilities of nature in my own recovery process made me very curious to see what the science behind all of this is saying. And I found that there's a wide variety of studies that has been carried out addressing the healing capabilities of nature and how it impacts our physical and emotional well-being. I thought it was interesting to just mention a few of those studies. The first study was carried out by a leading thinker in terms of what the health consequences are of nature to our healing capabilities. It's carried out by a psychologist and architect called Roger Ulrich back in the 80s. And what he did was examining the records of gallbladder surgery patients over half a dozen of years. Some of the patients had been assigned rooms with a window over the nearby park, and the other half of the patients were looking into a brick wall. And what his studies found, after studying for half a dozen of years, he found that the patients with the green view needed fewer post-operative days in the hospital. They requested less pain medication and were described in the nurse's notes as more compassionate and more kind. And that is worth to think about. And since then, a lot of studies have examined everything from schools to office buildings to housing projects and have shown that nature views really supports increased worker productivity, less job stress, higher academic grades and test scores, and less kind of aggression in inner city residents. And there's a study that has been carried out in Chicago, carried out in 98 different buildings over 2 years, where they compared buildings that had low amounts of vegetation nearby to those buildings that had medium levels of vegetation nearby. And buildings with the most green views saw a 48% fewer property crimes and a 56% fewer violent crimes than buildings with the least greenery. And I think that's really mind-blowing in a way. And it's, to me, really saying that we are part of nature and we have disconnected ourselves from nature through the past centuries. We used to be a species that lived so in tunely close with nature. We were one with nature. We could read its signals. We knew what plants to use for what kind of medicine, etc. And you can ask yourself, why did we let ourselves distance so much from nature when we are so obviously dependent on it? Not only in terms of our emotional well-being and physical well-being, but also we are dependent on thriving ecosystems for our survival. One of the theories about why we let this separation happen has its root causes in the Middle Ages, and it's actually quite interesting. So I wanted to just briefly explain that. In 1460, we had what is called the Little Ice Age. It was a significant cooling period with heavy, frequent storms and long winters and cold summers. And that really caused starvation and frustration among people. It also caused the fact that people got terrified of nature, of the powers and raw powers of nature. So in their search for someone to blame, they started to blame women, because women were seen as being more intuitively related to nature, that they knew more about which plants to use for what kind of medicine, and midwives use plants in their work. And women were seen as this kind of wild creature that were related to nature. And during this Little Ice Age, people got so terrified of nature and saw it as the work of the devil. And because women and nature were seen as closely linked, people saw women and nature and the devil as one. And that really started a period of so much friction and fear and place blaming in the societies. And in 1487, the Pope at the time issued what is called a papal bull, which is really an executive order coming from the Pope. And in that, he stated that it was mandatory to kill all witches. And witches were women who were in liaison with nature and thereby in liaison with the devil. And that's really started a 400-year-long witch hunt. It's not written down anywhere, but it's estimated that over 200,000 women was killed, but over millions were brutalized and tortured in a horrifying manner. At the time, it was also supported by science, because science had this need to understand, analyze, and control nature. And one of the leading thinkers in the medieval Europe was a thinker called Francis Bacon. And he really saw nature as this wild thing that scientists needed to understand how to control. And that was the road to success for mankind. If we could control nature, we would be all good. And he agreed with women having this knowledge and possess this knowledge of nature. So he actually supported the interrogations of women at the time. So women and nature was seen as something wild to fear and control and dominate and oppress. And I really think that is part of the root cause of the friction and the division that we see in our society today. And that through the past centuries, we have nourished and celebrated very masculine traits, and has caused this hyper-masculine world that in many ways is broken, where we have cherished productivity and efficiency and hierarchy and control, and forgotten the more feminine balance. And for me, that is not necessarily a gender issue. I'm really not in favor of feminists who are very angry at men. I think there are just as many men as there are women who are currently suffering under this hyper-masculine patriarchy that we have had and still have today. I really have been afraid of starting to have this kind of conversation, because I didn't want to go into the gender issue, but I think the time is here now where we need to kind of let go of all masks and start sharing our truth. We have recently seen the Me Too movement, which is incredibly important as well, to get these issues out in the light and acknowledge where the root cause is actually coming from. And maybe that can help encouraging us all to see ourselves as change makers, and that if we are in our own little life doing our best to get more balance between the more feminine traits and the masculine traits, maybe that can help create a more balanced society as a whole. Because what we put out into the world is so incredibly important. So I just wanted to raise this, because that's also something that we will discuss more in the episodes as we go along. I firmly believe that business systems needs to be inspired and redesigned to regeneration, that they can tap into so much inspiration and design in nature. So that's also why I've decided that the first episode will be with one of the leading thinkers within nature and business, Giles Hutchins. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you as well. The outcome of the Cracks of Light podcast series is more than a series of conversations with leading thinkers. We are also co-creating a leadership manifesto for a thriving world. So I'm asking all my guests to contribute with their elements, their key points as to what needs to be in a manifesto for a thriving world. And I'm very much welcoming you all to contribute as well. So if you go to my website, www.laura-storm.com, you can contribute to this manifesto and this co-creative process. And this manifesto is leading into other people's work that is currently being arranged at the moment, that I will update you all on as we go along. So this is not just happening in a little silo, but I'm doing the best I can to share this more broadly with the world and through the channels and the network that I have. So welcome on board. I hope you are excited as I am to start a discussion on what should be this new paradigm and how do we co-create a world where people, planet, and profit collectively can thrive. So welcome on board.